really fascinating one here. Now, I hope, I'm really hoping that y'all are staying on top of things, because if you have not, it's very possible if you've been in a 2-week snow coma and you woke up this morning and you haven't looked at chapter 19 on blood, and more importantly, haven't watched the lecture on chapter 19, the 3 lectures on chapter 19, then this morning will probably be close to a nightmare, okay, right? Because you can't really talk about what the immune system, lymphatic system, without understanding that most of the guys that do this are in the what? In the blood, right? Okay, so that's our players here. Okay, so right off the bat, one of the first questions I've got is answered here very early in this, and that is, what is the purpose of the the 3 functions of the lymphatic system? Or a better question might be, why did they put this chapter together? Why did they put lymphatic system and immunity together? Okay, that's a very good question, right? So what is, okay, I mean, really, why would they put these two together? And it should be, it's actually answered in, go ahead.
So your lymph system is actually part of your immune system. So, when you get cancer, they also look at your lymph nodes to see if
okay, that's close, that's really close. Okay, what we're going to see here is that some of the main players that do immunity like to hang out in these lymphatic systems, the lymphatic vessels. Okay, and so long story short, the lymphatic system is another set of tubes in your body that carries excess cellular fluid back to the heart. Okay. Now, one of the questions that will be on your test next Monday with a 100% probability was the one in the chapter on blood vessels, okay, which would be 18, on that exchange in the capillary bed. Remember that one? Kind of evil one, right? And I spent about 20 minutes on it in the video. If you haven't watched that chapter 18 video. But if you remember, it talked about how on the arterial side of a capillary bed, there is a higher hydrostatic pressure pushing water and this thing dissolving water out of the bloodstream, right, into the tissue area. And on the vein side, there is a colloid osmotic pressure that pulls it back in, right? And so these plasma proteins, which is one of our components of blood, chapter 19, it creates an osmotic pressure that pulls water back toward into the blood. Okay. Now, what was the problem with that picture? If you remember, and I don't have time to flip it back, but if you remember, there was more blowing out on the arterial side, right? There was more hydrostatic pressure outward, exceeded the colloid osmotic pressure on the vein side, pulling it back in. Okay. So in other words, let me say that one more time. The pressure from the heart pushing the blood in that capillary bed pushes the water out. The big proteins can't leave. They're stuck in the capillary bed. Remember, we have a closed circulatory system. Red blood cells can't get through those little holes. And all the water and all the things inside the water go out. But as we get to the capillary side, and of course the pressure, we lose all that hydrostatic pressure, the osmotic pressure overcomes that. But the problem is the hydrostatic pressure blows more out than the osmotic pressure pulls in on the vein side. So you have a buildup in fluid. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about. It's actually, I'm going to jump way ahead here, but I think this will help. So what's happening here, I'm talking about this exchange right here. On the arterial side, the hydrostatic pressure pulls water out and all the things in the water and feeds and nourishes the cells, right? Everything in the water, nutrients and hormones and vitamins and all that, everything they need. But on the vein side, the colloid proteins and the proteins made in the liver, called these colloid proteins and the plasma proteins, they can't leave this blue tube. Now it's looking blue because the oxygen's left. That's another story. We're not going to talk about the gases today. But the osmotic pressure pulls that water back in. And so we end up with more blowing out than we do coming back in. And that's why God made these tubes that are green in here, but they're not green in your body. Every picture has them green, right? Which they're not. And arteries ain't red, veins ain't blue either. Okay. They're the same color. It's just that we're trying to show you that the arteries are carrying what? Oxidated blood back. And veins carry blue or unoxidated blood, back to the heart. So these capillary beds that you see here green, they exist in these capillary beds, and they carry this fluid back in the bigger and bigger, just like veins, bigger and bigger vessels called the lymphatic vessels that eventually dump into the vena cava, into the right side of the heart to be pumped back in. And so these tubes, so say it one more time, you have arteries that carry blood out to the body, veins that carry it back. Remember how veins transported blood? The heart doesn't pump it back, but the squeezing of muscles as these veins go through the body, and they have valves to prevent backflow. Same thing in capillary bed. Same thing in lymphatic vessels. So lymphatic vessels are very similar to the veins. They just carry this excess fluid back up to the heart. Now, in the last 30 years, we discovered that some of the cells along that called lymph nodes, these little structures where lots of B and T cells hang out, these are little, I like to call them little ambushes to filter the lymph for pathogens. So the function of lymph nodes is to filter the lymph for pathogens. And there'll be multiple lymph nodes. So if you were to get some bad food in your intestines, right, and it gets put in the lymphatic system for bacteria or something, it's going to go through 30 or 40 lymph nodes before it gets back to the heart possible. And doing so, it'll get killed, get destroyed. And so when you have a lymph node that swells up and it's tender to the touch, you're having a bacterial infection. What you don't want to do is find a lymph node under your inguinal, under your arms, or in between your legs that's swollen up, but is not tender. So if you have one swelling up that doesn't hurt when you touch it, that's a sign. That is a possible indicator that you have cancer that's spread. And so cancer usually spreads in the lymph nodes before it spreads into the other organs, because all the cells are going to have, all the organs have these lymph nodes outside of them. So that's a pretty cool answer for that part right there. So in other words, these lymphatic vessels, these capillaries carry this excess fluid back, and God put a lot of these organs, these lymphatic organs, are areas where we filter out the lymph, especially lymph nodes. The spleen, we'll see later on, filters the blood for pathogens. So it's kind of one that's like a gigantic lymph node. It's the lymph node of the blood. It filters the blood for pathogens. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to go back to the beginning, but I just think that's really important that we kind of lay that out there real quick, right? So we put these two together because the immune system is the defense of the body, and the players that do this, white blood cells, leukocytes, they like to hang out in these lymphatic organs like lymph nodes and the tonsils and the spleen, and etc. Okay, so the lymphatic system itself is a set of one-way tubes that carry excess cellular fluid called lymph back to the cardiovascular system, to the heart. And organs of the lymphatic system include the lymph nodes I've already talked about, the spleen, and this other one we'll talk about as we go, the thymus. This is a structure in the neck area that when I was your age, we didn't know what it did. I remember taking histology at Ole Miss in 1984, 85, and the teacher says, we looked at the slide, and she said, y'all go figure out what this does. Here's what we know. Little baby's got one that's a bigger part of their body than an adult, than a 21, 30-year-old, and 60, 70-year-old people ain't got one. Tender organ in your neck that's really big in infants, it gets smaller as you get older, and the time you get 60, it's gone. They'll figure it out. Okay, and so, but in those 30 years since Dr. McClurkin said that in class, we now know these are where the T cells go mature. So this is like boot camp for T cells. So these are where one of your immune cells, the T cell, go and mature, and then they just jump out of that thymus into the bloodstream, kind of like paratroopers jumping out of the plane. On the normal, I think of paratroopers jumping out with parachutes, and over time you run out of stormtroopers to jump out. Okay, parachuters to run out. Okay, so pretty cool concept here, and we'll see that. So one of the first functions in this lymphatic system would be what? To obviously house these immune cells, but its other role is to regulate this interstitial fluid that is lost at these capillary beds. Look at that, fluid loss from plasma is about 2 to 4 liters per day. It must be returned to the cardiovascular system or you'll have problems. How many of y'all heard of this disease called elephantitis? It's a really bad one here. Y'all can Google it later. I won't have time to Google it. But this is a disease where this protista gets into your lymph nodes and clogs them up, specifically in the inguinal area, and men and women's legs swell to the size of an elephant. And that's why they call it elephantitis, because your legs will get as big as elephants, and you can't even see. I've seen pictures in some of the science biology books where you can't tell before a girl. But you can usually tell if the boys got it because they like to get in the lymphatic vessel that drains the scrotum, and their scrotum are as big as their leg, like dragging the ground. And they don't look very happy. It doesn't look like a very fun thing to have, okay? So it would have to be lanced, and it would probably never be right again, you know? But isn't that weird? But it's a great example. I think they had an arm in here, right? In the book, I put a photograph of an arm, and that was a woman who had probably breast cancer, and they removed the lymph node out of her arm, and in doing that, they clogged it up, and her arm swelled up. Okay, so edema is can be caused by this lymphatic system not draining back. So regulate interstitial fluid is a big one. Regulate that, and that's a big time one. And of course, it houses these immune cells. Here's one that a lot of people don't know. This is also the source of absorption of dietary fat. So interesting enough, fat doesn't get absorbed into the cardiovascular system, into the veins, into the bloodstream. And one of the questions is why, and I'll tell you why, because the little slits in the capillary beds are not big enough for the fat to go in. But the lymphatic ones are a little bit wider and the fat gets pulled in there. I thought it might have been for a reason to keep you from having blockage in your veins or something, right? We know fat can clog up your blood vessels, right? But it actually has to do with the size of that. And I guess God's got a plan there, but we may not really know. But these little capillary beds for the lymphatic vessels are called lacteals. So lacteal is the little capillary beds where we saw a while ago at the capillary, near the cardiovascular capillary bed, lacteals collect this excess fluid and carry it back to the cardiovascular system. But we actually absorb fat here, and we'll see that later. And of course, the immune function with all these lymphatic immune cells hang out in the lymph nodes and in the spleen, and basically this is where they hang out. So that's when we throw these two together. Okay. All right, here we got Invisible Girl with her green cheeks everywhere, and they are not green. It just drives me crazy how we do this. So let's first drew them green, and they just always draw green, but they're not green, and the fluid isn't green. But you can see here, this is pretty elaborate, and they carry all the way up. And I saw an article a couple years ago where they have found lymphatic vessels in the brain. So the brain has a lymphatic system to drain excess fluid out of the brain, which we didn't even identify that just a couple years ago. Tonsils also are called lymphatic tissue because they help fight infection. Y'all may or may not know that, right? So a lot of y'all have your tonsils taken out as kids, right? And that cuts down on the number of days you miss at school because it cuts down, they get infected real bad in a lot of people. There's that thymus in this girl. You can sit there in the middle, right above the heart. The lymph nodes are mainly hang out in under the arms and the inguinal area. You can see it along the digestive system. Because think about this: where are our places of infection? I mean, where we can have a invader enter our body. Mouth, breathing, and eating. So we got a lot of them in the neck. Okay, inguinal. Reproductive system. Urinary system exit and digestive system exit, right? So those are areas of infection, okay? And then of course, anywhere we absorb nutrients into our digestive system, there's gonna be a lot of bad stuff in our food. I get ticked at people talking about my food. Now, you probably have never eaten any food in your life that did not have bacteria on it. Okay? I mean, we just put the milk in the refrigerator so that the microorganisms don't eat it before we get ready to eat it. But who's ever got some milk, put in your coffee like I did yesterday morning, and I looked down the date, said March 20th. Excuse me, February 20th. That's not good. So that's 2 weeks out, right? When I poured it in the sink, it was chunky style already, right? It was already, so thank goodness I didn't put that in my coffee, right? Okay. But anyway, that gives you an example. Most everything has some bacteria or fungus in it, so our body is adapted to try to attack those things. Oh gosh, they got some 70 degrees in there. All right. I'm not going to make you learn like any of the namings of the plumbing here, so we'll move on through that. It is interesting that most of the body gets dumped, and look at the girl. The blue area represents all the lymphatic tissues that dump into that left brachiocephalic trunk. So that they actually dump into that, and only the right arm and the right side of the head dump into the right side. So it's kind of weird. You think there'd be an equal drainage, but most of this drains into the left. Okay, just kind of wild. This trivia. Okay, once again, it has valves in it to prevent backflow, right? And so the muscles contracting and breathing all push the slump back. And we didn't know this back in the 60s. When my mother had me in the early 60s, I think you lay in the bed for a week after giving birth. Today, what happens after you give birth? I mean, within an hour, they get a cattle prod and shock you to get you out, make you walk up down the hall. I'm just joking. But they get you out of the bed, right? They don't let you sit in the bed. And that's for general surgery, just almost any surgery. They want to get you up moving, just walking, help circulate the blood and lymphatic system back to the heart. And we didn't know that 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Okay, lymph nodes, we already said, are reticular connective tissue, little areas of swollen areas up, right? And basically they serve as just basically I just see it as an ambush, right? There's only one way, there's only one way to go through, and everything has to go through, and then so all these lymph cells are going to get exposure to it. And that's not a lymph node, that's just going to make the capillary bed, and we've already talked about that. Notice, see how the holes are? So only small things can go through these, and so it go into these, it can leave and go into the interstitial space. That's pretty cool. Edema is any swelling due to build of lymph. Okay, and so we experience that, especially during a woman's period, right? You're gonna have some swelling because you're losing blood and you're trying to retain fluids. There's a girl's arm, you know, where she had surgery for removing lymph node. And of course, we'll do a biopsy on those lymph nodes. And if cancer's in that, then that means it is spread to the lymph nodes. It's not good. Okay, and here are the blood cells that hang out in these lymphoid tissues, right? Our macrophage, who's the macrophage? Y'all remember this? That's the monocyte that left the blood to go out into the tissues, right? Okay, let's do a quick review real quick to see that we've already done this in lab, right? Or at least we did it online lab. Remember, there are 7 things in blood, right? Red blood cells carry oxygen. Platelets help form that clot, right? You know, the platelet blood, the first scalp. But the 5 white blood cells are all players in the immune system, right? The neutrophil is the most common one. He likes to eat what? Bacteria. So he gets a bacteria eater, phagocytic cell. Okay, the monocyte is also a phagocytic cell. It's the biggest one. When it leaves the blood and goes into the tissues, it's a macrophage. Okay, so look, macrophage, mature monocyte, very active phagocytosis. Then we had the eosinophil, right, that likes to help kill more parasitic infections, right, and plays a role in in allergies. But he's also phagocytic. He'll eat some things. Okay, and it's still kind of a mystery to me. I don't think we completely figured it out. Then we had the basophil, right? That was the rarest one that had those big black granulocytes in it, right? And it made histamine inhibitor, which is kind of playing a role here because histamine causes all these other cells to come in and attack an infection. So it alerts the immune system to trigger an attack. And we already said too, when the basophil leaves the blood and goes in the tissue, it's called a mast cell, right? Remember, we had 2 names, remember? Remember, I made a big joke about this. Monocytes or macrophages, right? Batman is who's Bruce Wayne, right? Okay, and then Clark Kent is Superman, right? They have 2 different identities, same person, 2 different identities. Monocytes are macrophages, and the basophil is the mast cell. Okay, and that brings us to our last blood cell, right? I'm reviewing the lymphocyte, remember? And this was the second most common one, right? Lymphocyte. Remember, it was a perfect circle with cytoplasm. These can be divided into 2 groups, and we did not identify them in lab because I can't identify them on microscope. It's been a long time. You can identify them at 1,000 power, okay? But we're not going to do that. We're just going to talk about what they do. B and T cells are going to be your specific immune system, okay? And so the lymphocytes are divided into B and T cells. I give you one guess which ones go to the thymus for maturation. I've already said it. T cells, okay? That's where they get their name. They're thymus derived, okay, and then the B cell, it doesn't have an organ in our body where it goes and matures. In some of the chickens, there's this bursa of verrucus where they go and mature, and that's where we get the B from, okay? So the B comes from where they were isolated in a structure in the birds, okay? But we don't, ours just mature in the blood, and B cells do what we call humoral immunity. They make antibodies. Now, I got confused first time I heard this, right? Because I heard antibody. That's not what I said. I said antibody, right? Antibodies are little molecular wires that have 2 binding sites, and they bind to pathogens and mark them to be eaten by the monocytes and the neutrophils. Okay? So B cells make antibodies, which are super important. T cells do what's called cellular immunity, and they attack cells that have been taken over by cancer and viruses. And they include the helper T cell, which we now know is a modulator of the whole immune system. So if we're thinking about this, and just kind of laying it out here, because I'm going to get into this more detail probably in the lecture on Wednesday, but I want to give y'all in person kind of a quick overview. So think about a big wreck last week in the ice storm at the bridge at the Coldwater Bridge, right between here and Coldwater. Remember, like 3-mile bridge, right? So there's a terrible wreck there. It's an 18-car pileup. 18 cars piled up. I mean, people screaming, hollering. There's a darn chemical truck spewing out some green liquid, right? It's all kind of bad, right? First person that pulls up who's not the wreck is going to pull their phone out and they're going to dial what? 911. Let me introduce you to the dispatcher of your immune system. That is the T helper cell. That T helper cell will assess the situation and call out other troops to come in and attack, including all the blood cells, right, and more B and T cells. AIDS kills this character, thereby knocking out your immune system to respond to a normal infection. Matter of fact, people who get AIDS usually die roughly here back in the day before we had these drugs, about a third would die the first time they get the flu or pneumonia. Second time, another third would die, and the final third would die the third time you got pneumonia. It's almost like a baseball. You got three strikes and you're out. There's just a handful of people that ever lived through 3 full-blown pneumonias for days. Okay. So very terrible disease, by the plague of my generation. Looks like y'all just gonna be COVID, right? We're going to be talking about this for a long time. We'll probably be talking about it when we get to that point. But to me, this is a great example of a terrible disease. Right? Because we did not realize all these people were dying in the early 80s, and then we now know that this virus kills this helper T cell, which is the modulator of the immune system. Now, the other thing that's super cool about these B and T cells, and the reason we call it specific immunity, is not only do they specifically kill the pathogen, right? The monocytes and neutrophils are kind of like, and y'all all seen the movies, right? When they got the gold in Fort Knox, right? And they got the guards. Has anybody ever been in a military? I don't know guard, but have you ever went into a military base? Okay, I was in Hawaii last 2 summers ago, and we got turned down this road. And by the way, Hawaii's got a lot of military bases, right? And I was looking for a restaurant, and the restaurant was actually on the base. So I pulled into this guard box, and I just turned around, dude. I wasn't about to go in there, man. I'm scared that I ain't never been in the army. I don't understand all that stuff. Lord, but you laughing at me because they just been really nice. They would just check my ID and let us go in there and eat, right? Because it's actually one of the most highly best rated restaurants in that area was on the base. But my little phone app telling me where to go eat didn't say it was on military base. I pulled in this road to pull in there, and it scared me, man. Because they had troops and stuff all night. You know, the guy had a gun, right? To me, monocytes and neutrophils are like that, a guard at the checkpost, right? They don't care who you are. You can't come in if you don't have the right paperwork, right? You can be the president of the United States, and they will say, sir, you can't come in. You're not authorized to come in, right? Okay. B and T cells, okay, are different. These are the elite assassins. And I mean, think of it like this, because you know this happens. We got snipers, right? They'll give a picture to go shoot Ron Robin, go shoot, whatever, some terrorists, right? So they will infiltrate and go and kill a specific target. And these are your most highly trained immune cells. They will go attack a specific target. And now here's the other thing that's gonna blow your mind. Not only they're specific, they got something that nobody else has got. They have memory. They will produce memory cells so that if the Robin coccus bacterium ever comes in your body again, we kick its butt where it gets to. And that is the basis of getting a vaccine. Vaccines expose you to markers or to the organism without giving you the full disease, so that you have all these cells ready to attack when you get the real one. Okay, everybody follow me? That's such important, right? And really want to I'll throw it out there to all my classes this week. Y'all know that we had another good week last week about this fight with COVID vaccine, right? Johnson & Johnson, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America, they got a vaccine that got approved on Friday, and the FDA approved it on Sunday, and they're shipping it out this morning. 3 million doses went out this morning. It is a single shot COVID vaccine. And for all the crazy people who think they are, got their PhD in biology on Facebook, this one is an old school vaccine, so it actually uses the virus, and it will change your DNA. Okay, but it is for those who are scared about the new Moderna or the Pfizer messenger RNA vaccine, which I already had the first shot already. I think it's fairly safe. This one is like a flu vaccine. If you've ever had a flu vaccine, this is the same concept on this one. And it's one shot, and it looks to be 72% effective, but it looks to be 100% effective. No one died in the study that got it. So nobody got the ventilator and died, that thing. Okay. So please encourage your family to go get that shot. Okay. I'm getting my second one Sunday up at South Haven. So I'm registered. I was going to get it the Friday of the snow, but they canceled. Okay, but it is kind of cool because I know that's a terrible disease, but this directly relates to why we're wearing masks today, right? So it's kind of very interesting. Okay, to me. Now some other cells that play a little bit of a role here. These dendritic cells are. They're in there, the bone marrow. I'm not even sure what all they do, but they also are in there. And reticular cells are just form that mesh. Remember the reticular fibers we talked about look like a hairnet? So all these lymph node organs like spleen, lymph nodes, they are made out of that. So that's what holds the cells in. So they form like a little net for these B and T cells to set in, and then the fluid, the lymph goes through it and it filters, just like your filter paper. Think about maybe reticular fibers or reticular filter paper, right? And think about, you know, so that's kind of pretty cool because they hold all these cells in. Okay. And here's what it looks like. So it's just basically a lymph node is reticular fiber with B and T cells and monocytes and neutrophils in it. And there's a dendritic cell, also one of them in there. Okay, here's a cool term here, MALT, mucus-associated lymphoid tissue. These are different areas that are not big enough to be its own little structure like a lymph node, but these are areas of lymphatic tissue along the digestive tract. We see these a lot in the digestive tract, and these are going to eat bacteria out of our food. So they're just where B and T cells cluster. Sometimes they're called power patches in the intestine. The tonsils is another good example of that, and the appendix, which is a weird structure, which is it's a little sac in the where the small and large intestines dump into each other, small into large. It's a blind patch, and we didn't really know what it did. We now think it probably plays a role as a this is kind of crazy, but a storm shelter for bacteria, for good bacteria, so that when you get a diarrhea or an infection that blows out, it makes you have a blowout. I'm sorry. Then all the good bacteria don't get washed out, and these guys come out of the appendix and receive your colon. Okay, because we want to have certain good bacteria in our colon. The tonsils also fall in this group. Pharyngeal, pontine, linguinal tonsils, and tonsillitis removerum. Here we go. I think one of my favorite ones is people will look in the back of the throat and see that little thing floating right here. That's the uvula, and they'll think that's the tonsils. That's not the tonsils. That's the uvula. That closes off the upper respiratory so you don't blow your food out your nose. Everybody's little kids, they learn how to eat. First time they'll be blowing out their nose, right? They have got that uvula figured out. And I got a picture, one of my favorite pictures, one of my little girls eating with food coming out the nose and the ear, and they stuck it in their ear, and then learn how to use that baby spoon. But anyway, these are just areas that, and these can be removed, but I would say something that's kind of interesting. You don't want to remove one of those other organs. You do not want your spleen removed, for example. Okay, you would not want to have your thymus removed. Right? Okay, those are things you might want to keep, but you can have your tonsils moved and not really lose any much immunity. Okay, and of course, appendix are cut out all the time. There it is, little blind pouch over on the left. This cut out. Matter of fact, here's one if you're ever on one of those $1 million quiz game TV shows where they ask questions, right? How many appendixes have been to the moon? And you're sitting here in that 13 seconds, you got the answer, trying to count how many astronauts have been to the moon, how many walked. Don't worry about it, just say 0. Because all astronauts have their appendix removed. Think about that. You're halfway to the moon on a 2-week trip back home, and that thing swells up. And what it does, it swells up, it's infected, and it ruptures, and it spews bad bacteria all over your abdomen. And in 30 years, I've had like 3 or 4 students who had this, and it did not go well. One girl had to have her intestine removed because it sets up infection everywhere. So the treatment is going to give you an internal bath for like 2 or 3 days. Just literally blow fluids through you with a drain somewhere and just continually flush your guts. And last resort is I had a sister-in-law that had hers opened up. So they just put her in an oxygen tank because oxygen kills these bacteria. So they just basically oxidized her stomach. They cut her open and left her in a like oxygen tent for a few days to oxidize her abdominal cavity. Yes. Okay, she lived through it. It was okay. But she did leave my brother-in-law after that. So that was not related to the surgery, I think. It was just, he was crazy too. But anyway, here's these lymphoid tissue fire patches. And why would we have, I think this makes perfect sense to me. Why would these be right behind that supracolumnar? Because that's where bacteria are absorbed in our intestines, right? With our food, right? So guys got these lymphoid organs right under that supracolumnar. We already showed lymph nodes. Here's what a lymph node looks like. And I love this picture. This is about the end of your finger. So these are very small. These are not like huge. You know what I'm saying? But about the ones under your arm, probably about the tip of your finger. I would say when my dad had colon cancer, they removed about 2 foot of his colon. And when the surgery came out, it told us the surgery went well. And of course, he removed all the cancer, so they went 4 or 5 inches farther on each side. And I asked him the question that he kind of gave me the death eye. I said, how many lymph nodes did you remove? They said there were a bunch of lymph nodes in the interstitial area. He looked at me and said, well, you teach that biology or something? I said, yeah, a little bit. And he goes, I don't know. He said, I'll be right back. And he went back to pathology, came back and said 12. He went and counted them. And like the other 12, only one had cancer, but that made him have stage 3 cancer. So it already left his tissue into the lymph node. That's how we stage cancer. Stage 1, if it's in the part of the organ where it starts. Stage 2, if it's spread through the whole organ. Stage 3, if it's the lymph node. Stage 4, it's another organ. So if you get a diagnosis of stage 4 colon cancer, that means it may be in your brain or spinal cord, or it's moved to the bone, it's moved to another organ, and that's really, really bad. But look at this, see how all these little lymphatic tubes come in, all the little arrows point in? And so all the lymph has to filter through before it can leave here. So it literally is like a little filter, right, for the lymph. And of course, we have hundreds of them. Spleen has this red and white pulp with reticular fibers in it. Here it is. And it filters the blood for pathogens. So it's very similar. It's the lymph node of the blood. It filters the blood for pathogens. I got kind of a while here. We're going to do this and just tell this. I thought this was pretty cool. But I had a young girl one time when I taught her, she was like 18. And I know some of y'all are 18, 19. Sweetest little girl you ever know. I actually got to know, she actually spoke to me in lab and we got to know each other. And then I didn't see her for like, I don't know, 12 years. And she comes back in my class, maybe 30, I don't know, 30 years old to be a nurse, and complete personality change. I've never seen anything like it. The little girl at 18 was nice and sweet. And this girl, I can only describe her as a female doll. Okay, that's all I can think of. Okay, I'm just telling you. She griped about everything. And hot, and cold, and I'm illness, and she's not running out. She always had running nose. I mean, she just always sick. And she had 2 kids, and every time they got sick, she said they get this little bug, and I ended up in the hospital. And she said she's been on like in the hospital like 5 times in 10 years on IV antibiotics. So finally one day I called her out, I said, she said you had to take it over. It's been 5 years, you know, as y'all know, doing the nursing. And I said, so I got out with her, we kind of rekindled our friendship enough where I could ask her one day. I said, what happened to you? In the nicest way I could. What changed your life to make you so bitter? And she goes, well, it started with a guy, of course. But her first husband, and that we got to get along, and she wrecked and hit a tree and punctured her spleen, had it removed. And so she had been sick because she didn't have a spleen. Now look, I got a friend of mine that worked here 30 years. He's 63. He retired. He played Major League Baseball, and he got spiked on a slide. He was playing like second base or third base, I think, and a guy came in and knocked him out. And the next morning, his whole side was bleeding, blue. And he had to have his spleen emergent surgery the next morning. So he had it removed, and it didn't affect him the rest of his life. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you're one of those sickly people and you lose your spleen, you ain't got a real problem. Okay? Because we're all in different spectrum. You know what I'm saying? Like some people never get sick. Raise your hand. Who in here never gets sick? Okay, I rarely get sick. Okay, I probably have on a 0, let's say a 0 to 100 scale, I get like a 90 immune system, right? That girl probably was like a 50. And when she lost her spleen, she went to a 30. You know what I'm saying? It really was tragic. So, but it gave me a paradigm shift, right? Because I just thought she was being ugly to me. She was really hurting all the time because she had lost her spleen. But I don't want to stereotype that word. If you lose your spleen, you think you're going to be sickly. Okay, but just be aware that we're all on different ends of this. And if you're in a sickly person, then you may not want to lose that thing. And I had another girl, little son, wrecked his bicycle, and instead of punching a hole in it, it went up under his rib, drilled a hammer and busted the spleen. But it's in its own little capsule, and they just washed it. They let it heal itself, and they drained it. I'll tell you, the texture of this is very similar to liver. Has everybody in here ever like played with liver? Like, I mean, if you ever, you're like, why would I play with liver? Well, if you ever been fishing, a lot of people use liver for bait. Have you ever cooked liver? People eat liver. Liver is one of these little organs, kind of like Jello, but the more you play with it, it just becomes mud. So you don't want to, it's pretty delicate, I guess is the word I'm looking for. We'll move on. And then I already told you, I spoiled my stuff about the thymus. So that large and very active in infants and children reaches maximum size at age 12 to 14, and then it starts regressing until you don't have a spleen when you're maybe 60, 65. Okay, now here's another fun. Let me tell you this real quick about spleen too. Here's another cool thing. Because I hear somebody right now remembering our lecture on the endocrine system. I'm going to tear up here, but this also makes the endocrine gland hormone. Remember thymosin? Okay, now watch this. So here is thymosin production as you get, 10, 30, 60 years old. So thymosin production falls off due to the thymus dying, right? Everybody with me? And what's this? Here's going to be a mind blower. Let's plot death in America. Right on top of that. Stop the presses. People get old and die because they don't have a good immune system. Guess what we're bioengineering right now? Thymosin, and you can get injections of this. They will not bring you back to a 20-year-old immune system, but it don't hurt either. It helps people. They give it to age patients, people who have compromised immune system. So there is hope here, right? We may be able to trick a 60-year-old body into thinking it's got, a 20-year-old immune system, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of research in the next 20 years on this. So we got, the people get old and die, and one of the reasons older people like me get sick and die is our immune system ain't what an 18-year-old is. And so this is something worth looking into, right? Now, y'all are smiling today, but when you get closer to 60, you will find this very important. Okay, it will become much more important to you, right? As you get a little older. Isn't that kind of cool? So thymus for the T cells material. Look at that. By age 65, the rate of T cell production falls to 2% of the rate at which infants produce T cells, which is bad, right? Pretty wild. Okay, and here it is in the neck, and we show it's nothing really dramatic inside of it, it's just a little organ making these glands. Okay, now we're going to dive into an overview of the immune system now. Now that we've made all the groundwork. I've already answered, I believe, 1, 2, 3, and maybe some others there. Okay, now so let's look at these lines of defense real quick. Okay, this is a really cool way to do this. And sometimes I've read it a couple of times. This chapter, I don't know if the reading always matches this little picture here, but look at that. The first line of defense in our body is our cutaneous membrane and mucous membranes. Think about this. If our epithelium always did its job with how to infect disease, right? Because that epithelium lining our mouth all the way through our digestive system, that's food come in, but we don't want bacteria to come in the food, right? I'm sorry, my mind, I hate to do it, but HIV, right, comes in through what? The reproductive system, right? That is designed to receive the male, right, body part, right, and the semen, and to make a baby, right? That's what that's designed for, right? So that sneaks in with that, right? But the female vagina does it much better than the anus, and that's where a lot of people get AIDS, right? Because having anal sex. Boy, girl, boy, boy. I don't know if girls can have anal sex with each other. I don't want to know if y'all can, but I don't think so, okay? So it is the one receiving the semen, right, that is very much more susceptible to getting HIV. Things you should know, okay? Not judging you. I'm not telling you what to do or not do. I'm just telling you what will kill you if I want, okay? And so that is an epithelium not designed for that particular activity, right? So anyway, pretty wild. Second line of defense are these innate cells, the neutrophils and monocytes. Like I was talking about, the ones that are always patrolling, looking to kill things, right? Also, we have some proteins called, we'll talk about it in a minute, called complement. They're in the blood, and they just kill bacteria and pathogens randomly. Kind of like rat poison, throw behind the refrigerator, kills rats and eat it, right? Okay, so I always think of rat poison, I think about complement, some of that. But usually the first line works. If that don't work, then neutrophils will work, usually second line. But when those two fail, we bring in the heavy hitters, and the adaptive immunity is the B and T cells, is the lymphocytes. The only time lymphocytes are involved is that third line defense. When we do that, what I talked about, remember specific immunity being the B cells making antibodies and the T cells doing cellular immunity, producing helper T cells to call more troops in the fight. So these adaptive cells will call in more second line defense cells to come in. Okay, so that's a very good point to me. Make sure you catch that. Okay, now I've got about 10 minutes. I got about 2 minutes. Okay, so I'm gonna fly in. I want to show you something, just a couple of things, and I'll come back right here and pick up and lecture on Wednesday. But I want to show this group what I got y'all something kind of cool, and I'll say it again in the video that y'all watch for Wednesday or Friday. Okay, but watch this. I'm gonna jump ahead and show you some stuff. Show you some cool stuff. Okay, I didn't mean to do that. Hang on, keep going. I think we have. They go back over B and T cells again. There it is. There's that complement I was talking about, which we'll talk about in the lecture. Okay, I think there's a nice table here at the end. Yeah, look at this. So here's what that helper T cell can do. Look at that. And this is just showing some of the things. That's actually complement. Okay, that's complement. Crazy. I didn't mean that. I'll let y'all figure out complement. It's not going to be a big part of your test. Okay, but I believe at the end here we had a nice summary of an attack somewhere. Fever is part of it, right? Fever is good. Okay, look at that. So the first line of defense is skin, mucous membranes, normal bacterial flora in your gut. The bacteria actually defend your gut, by the way, guys. Okay, second line are phagocytic cells, monocytes, neutrophils, macrophages, eosinophils, other cells called natural killer cells. There's the basophil and mast cells making histamine, antibacterial complement, which is in the blood. Interferon is an antivirus drug made by the liver. Okay, interleukins are a whole group of chemicals that these immune cells make to kill things. Inflammation, swelling up, and fever are part of the defense mechanism. Okay, when they fail, then we have to elicit this specific defense, which is gonna be B and T cells. But let me get to this picture graph here, and I don't have time. Yeah, I'll answer how they're activated, which is, I know the question there. We'll answer that Wednesday, but let me show you this. This is one of the coolest pictures ever. If I can get to it. Okay, here we go. Look at this. This is why we do immune system. This is why we do vaccines. Let me show that. Those are antibodies. I'm getting there and then we'll stop with this picture. Okay, I promise. Okay, yeah, look at this. First time you get the flu or you get a bacterial infection, let's say you get COVID, then it takes about 2 weeks for you to make this many antibodies. Okay? And then you get the infection, you get sick. The second time with memory cells, because you have these memory cells, you usually don't get the same infection twice. Then you would have this many antibodies in 2 weeks. And that's enough to wipe it out and you never get sick. So what vaccines do is they trick your body into making the antigen that triggers your immune system to make these B and T memory cells so that you whip it really good the first time you get into it. So the vaccine I got makes my cells make what? The spike proteins in that virus, right? So I've got all these antibodies, these memory cells floating, so that when I get the real COVID vaccine breathed in my lungs, I will kick its butt like this before it gets to toehold. And that Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine is 95% effective in knocking it out. That's really good. That's how vaccines work. Pretty cool. We'll finish, we'll go back and pick up this and kind of explain that, answer the rest of them on Wednesday or Friday. Okay, everybody cool? Everybody with me? I know we got 2 out here today. It's not a good day to miss. It's first time we met in 3 weeks, right? This Monday class, right? Y'all have a great one. Don't forget, written test next Monday. I'll send out the morning as a reminder. Afternoon, I can do it in the morning. I don't do that morning stuff. Don't do the afternoon. So be planning to come to one of them on 5:30, but I'll probably, Monday I'm open and I'll probably be there all afternoon Monday, okay?
Okay, so we got.
Now, y'all obviously don't have to take it on Monday because y'all got to take the written on Monday, so I'll probably have y'all come another day. But I've got it reserved 5:30, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, through Thursday.
Ring 306? No.
Yeah, I think it is at 3:06.
Monday at 9 here. Is it 9 o'clock here?
Written here, yeah, but that, you gotta come up the extra one for that, yeah.
5:30, computer part,
Yeah,
and what's that Monday, 1:30?
that I may be able to do it Monday because I don't have anything, but I don't think y'all want to take